Welcome to our next series in leadership lessons with the founder and CEO of NerdWallet, Tim Chen. Tim, so great to have you here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jason.
Of course. I'm Jason Nazar. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Comparably. We are an online employee review platform that helps companies with their employer brand. I'm also a serial entrepreneur. I started and sold a couple different companies in the tech space and a pretty active angel investor and board member here in Southern California. And one of the companies that I've always been in awe of since 2009 is NerdWallet, for how fast you all came on the scene, how quickly you grow, how much you were helping people with all facets of personal finance. So I've been excited and looking forward to having you join us, and was excited to see, Tim, that you actually just won our award for Best CEO for Diversity on Comparably. So congratulations, and we'll be talking about company culture as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So in your own words, can you share for everybody, how you describe NerdWallet today?
Yeah, NerdWallet helps people make better financial decisions. So I always tell people, I think there's three huge problems in America. It's education, healthcare, and finance. And, within finance, one of the big problems is it's really hard for consumers to get transparency and just assurance around what they're doing, because there's a lot of intermediaries between them and the products, brokers, agents, advisors, etc., who might be trying to steer them one way or another to earn a kickback, right? So the whole system is fraught with uncertainty. So we really try to be that trusted person that you can go to just find the best answer, find the best products, and yeah.
Right. Well, it's an easy Google search way to see the mythology of the company, how you and your co-founder started it with $800, grew it to a company worth hundreds of millions in valuation, probably now even more than that. One of the things that I'd love to start off talking about is what's, to me, so unique and special about your journey is you bootstrapped the company for the first 6 years. And unlike so many of us that raise a lot of venture capital and, run businesses upside down and negative for quite a period, you were running a profitable business from the get-go. Can you talk about that journey? Like, and we'll get into how and why you started the company in a bit, but what did you do in that first year to really get a business that was self-sustainable and to grow as quickly as it did?
Yeah, well, you know what? It was a journey. I started off with a lot of wrong assumptions, right? The company really started off as a spreadsheet. My sister asked me for help finding a credit card, and I said, "Let me Google that for you," and was not really happy with what I saw, right? So I made a spreadsheet for her, and it got forwarded to some friends. So first assumption that was totally wrong was that if I put this spreadsheet on the internet as a web app, a bunch of people will show up because it's awesome and helpful. So no one showed up. And then that kind of introduced the one of the biggest challenges in succeeding in financial services, where it's very customer acquisition driven. If you don't figure out how to build consumer trust and reach people at a reasonable cost, no one's ever gonna know you exist, right? And so really the first 5 years of the company while we were bootstrapping was really oriented towards solving that problem. So we did things like PR, content marketing, tried to win Google search, and banged our head against the wall a lot in that process, but managed to figure those things out and overcome those obstacles over time.
Yeah. And at first, were you just making money by the affiliate fees of getting people to sign up for credit cards? Was that the first revenue model?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, like many affiliates, we're matchmakers between consumers and products, right? And I think when you're starting off and you are subscale, the big challenge is the affiliate fees you're making are going to be a lot lower than what other people in your industry are making. So you can't really afford to buy consumers' attention compared to some of the bigger players. The angle that worked for us was really trying to be more trusted. Once people showed up, they were more engaged. It made a ton of sense to the consumers and journalists, et cetera, that we were telling our story to. So they were more compelled to interview us and write about us. So doing right by the consumer really was critical to what we wanted to do, but also to the strategy of building the business.
All right, I'm going to come back to the business in a moment. I think your story of how and why you started the company is just so fascinating. So can you share your transition from, being in finance to being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd worked in finance for maybe 5 years. I was at an investment fund, a hedge fund, investing in technology stocks, and I was fired during the great financial crisis. And yeah, I mean, I think, I did pick up a few skills from that industry. I think it really teaches you to think hard about what is a great sustainable business versus what is competing to the death in terms of either pricing or something that just doesn't sustain a long-term business. And I think that industry also did a really good job training you to think about drivers and levers behind businesses. If you can't boil down a business to one or two or three levers that really matter and know the relative weights of those levers, you can't invest very well because you can't really understand the sensitivity to those things. But that I feel like that industry also really wires you in very bad, harmful ways in terms of becoming an entrepreneur too. It's very oriented towards more like superstar individual behavior rather than collaboration. Very oriented towards like short-term compensation and aggressiveness. Things that don't really work that well when you're trying to build a collaborative team that's solving a problem. So pretty mixed bag there.
I read online how you were always this incredibly achievement oriented person. It seemed like everything you did from high school, college on was just success moving up that ladder. What was it like for you in 2008 to be fired for what I'm assuming was the first time in your life, and maybe have like the first big setback of your professional career?
Yeah, I mean it's an identity crisis. I mean, I think I see it. I'm very empathetic and actually see it today with a lot of the people we may hire out of, say, like a top MBA program, right? Like I think the challenge is that the truth is that in the real world, no one really fully understands the rules of the game, and part of the challenge is just trying to make sure you're running the right obstacle course in the first place, right? It's not getting through the obstacle course, but making sure you're on the right obstacle course. And I think the issue with people who come out of really academic and career-oriented tracks at like big companies is that the path is so defined, all the rules are given to you, and you're just sitting there not questioning that and turning through it. That doesn't necessarily make you a great entrepreneur though, right? And so being able to step back and figure out if you're right on the right obstacle course was like the big adjustment for me.
Yeah, I've had this philosophy for a long time that a lot of times it's the best students, the one that have excelled the most, that go on to business school and law school, that often struggle in startups and with entrepreneurship. And it's because they're used to having an answer for everything, and they just need to be strong enough and skilled enough and smart enough to find that answer. Yet when you're dealing with a blank canvas, I have this joke that it's most of my friends from grad school that were the C students that now hire the A students.
Right.
They were,
Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
yeah. When you were younger, did you have a vision in your life that you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Like, was that in the back of your head? Were your parents entrepreneurs, growing up?
Short answer is sort of. My entire family was computer scientists. I actually tried to major in computer science and found it really hard, so I ended up minoring in computer science. But yeah, but the signs were there. I mean, I think even from 5th grade to 8th grade, I was like, buying stuff and reselling it to people in school and getting in trouble for doing that. So definitely always have enjoyed the hustle, enjoyed figuring out opportunities and seeing opportunities. And I don't know if you feel this, but oftentimes the reasons I can't sleep at night is when I feel like there's just too much opportunity. And so my head is just spinning thinking about it. So I think it takes a bit of optimism in terms of what is possible to really have the audacity to go try something in the first place.
Yeah. So, you and your co-founder were not the first folks to, put together comparisons in the financial space. There have been lots of businesses before, some successful, like Lower My Bills, and lots of them, including Bill Shrink, that didn't have the outcome that they were hoping for.
Right.
What would you say? And you said that, I think one of the things that to me is so important is that people look at a company like NerdWallet a lot of times, they don't realize the blood, sweat, and tears that you had to put in for those first couple of years, and just how much of a grind it was and how long you probably stayed focused on just a small set of problems. If you had to boil it down going backwards, like, what did you and your team do in those first 2-3 years that gave you traction getting customers or built a better experience for customers that other folks in, other competitor of yours and other contemporaries weren't able to do?
Yeah, I think I'll try to boil it down. I'd say that, yeah, at that early phase, there's never time to do all the things you want to do. And it often feels like you're leaving 6 things on fire just to focus on the one thing that you think matters. I think if you're doing it right, that's what it feels like. And just to give you some specific examples, we didn't hire our first product manager until we were 40 people and probably doing like 40 million in revenue, right? And I think like we didn't hire our first designer until a little bit after that. And that's highly unusual in the Valley. But I think what we were really focused on was solving the customer acquisition problem, and really testing and iterating constantly around that. So, one of our early hires we really lucked out on, but she really brought in this process and discipline around treating everything as a hypothesis on the marketing side, and doing a retro at the end of every week and iterating for the following week, and just measuring results maniacally. And I think as an organization, if you can't call out the one metric that matters the most and have everyone aligned around that, then you're not going to be prioritizing correctly across many people. Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that's probably a bit different than most other startups is I think you have to figure out which obstacle course you're running. For us early on, when we launched, there were probably at least 1,000 other websites doing exactly what we were doing, at least from a business model perspective. And so on the one hand, you have to have, I feel like, the audacity to think that you can do a better product and a better business than everyone else. But on the other hand, you also have to realize that there's a lot of smarter people out there, and you have to be a little shameless in terms of humbling yourself and just learning what everyone else is doing, right? So I have spent hundreds of hours just dissecting every single competitor in the space on every dimension, and just really understanding like what edges each one of them have, and thinking about what we could fold into our own practice. And to this day, like, fintech is so broad, I still spend a ton of time doing that, trying to get great field vision.
Yeah, I think that's incredible advice and something a lot of folks look over. What was it like for you? You were in a weird position where so many of us are, fighting and clawing to try to raise venture capital, a seed round, a Series A, get our Series B done. You must have been in this position from after the first year or two where VCs were knocking down your door to try to give you money. Like, what gave you the discipline to hold off for so long before you raised capital? And what did it feel like to be in that position where you were being courted so much, having never taken in any outside capital?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, my take is if you are in a winner-take-all market where like speed and the amount of capital invested is a big driver of the ultimate outcome, then I think you have to take on a lot of capital very quickly. It's actually the strategically correct thing to do. I just didn't feel like that was true of our space at all. There had been, companies that had been in there at the time, 10 plus years, who weren't really gaining the consumer mindshare. It was kind of like a more slow and steady type of industry, and quite fragmented and with many winners. So I felt like as a result of that, and because we really wanted to focus on consumer experience rather than short-term monetization, that it was just a better alignment with what we were trying to do. But yeah, I mean, I think it really just depends on the business that you're in.
And what would you say today is the main? I think it's clear to see that you all are experts in customer acquisition, but from a consumer experience, because your product has a lot of different aspects, right? I think it does a lot of what Mint used to, right? And Intuit bought my last company. Obviously, they made a big splash buying Credit Karma for $7 billion, which I'm sure shone an even bigger light on you.
Right.
Obviously you do everything around helping with insurance and credit card products and credit scores. If from the point of view of your customer, of your user, how do they describe what makes NerdWallet different and better than all these different alternatives out there today?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little touchy feely, but we put the consumer first, right? Like, I'll just give you one random example. So if you go on our life insurance page, we'll say, well, first of all, do you have any dependents? And if you say no, we say you don't need life insurance, right? Like we try to start with the relationship and not the transaction. And I think that just like whether people can put their finger on that particular thing, they can feel it, right? And like it's either when you meet a financial advisor, either alarm bells go off or you're like, I can trust this person. And it's those little things that give you those hints along the way. And so, yeah, by always like putting your best interest first, I think it feels a little bit different.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know there's a lot of people that are going to be listening saying, I don't know what someone like Tim would have or should have done differently because they're having so much success. But, I think, again, to me, what's so fascinating is this concept of if I knew then. So if you could take a time machine back into your 20s, and I think you're 37 now, right?
38.
38. All right. And if you could take a time machine back into your 20s and you could have a conversation with yourself, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old Tim version, and why would you give that advice?
Where do I start? Yeah, there's so many dimensions of this. I mean, if the advice were specific to the NerdWallet journey and where we really shot ourselves in the foot numerous times along the way, I mean, I'd probably start by saying that, well, okay, so first and foremost, I'll use the obstacle course analogy again. Make sure you're running the right obstacle course. There's been times when I've spent 6 months building the wrong product where had I just talked to if I had just picked up the phone and tried to sell the product before I started building it, I would have realized very quickly that it was just a stupid idea, right? We built this product comparing a bunch of credit union products to each other. And, I spent, 3.5 months building this thing. And then I called up a credit union and I was like, hey, this is the best thing ever. And they're like, we would never participate in that because all our local competitor credit unions are listed alongside us. And I was like, oh, okay. Wow. I wish I had made this phone call earlier, right? So that's the first one. The second one is, I think it's a really bad instinct that if you think you're smart and you've had a lot of success in life, academically or with your career, that you can figure out the obstacles along the way. The reason that's a bad assumption is because at best, you'll figure them out slowly compared to someone who's run the obstacle course before. And so it's really about just get over yourself and get some help. Like figure out who's like half a step ahead of you or one step ahead of you and reach out to them on LinkedIn, talk to them, get their perspective, ask them what obstacles you didn't think that you didn't even think of that you're going to run into, right? The other really bad instinct I had was if I just put together enough smart people into a team, we'll figure this thing out, right? And I guess I've gotten a lot more nuanced view of what smart means. There's all sorts of different types of intelligence and culture that are required to get the job done, right? Some people are brilliant in terms of getting groups of people to work all together. Some people are brilliant in solving engineering problems. Some people are brilliant in terms of like understanding long-term business strategy, right? You've really got to piece together a complementary set of people in order to have any chance of success. And then, the other thing I think I really made some errors along the way on too was just like, how important is it to invest the time and the training to get that group of people to work well together? Smart people aren't always the best at realizing what they're bad at. And that can make them insufferable people to work with. And so there's like a lot of art to getting that piece right. Yeah, and I think we've just gotten really lucky along the way too. I could easily have seen how a few things could have gone wrong that um, ended up going okay. I remember we were about to sign our term sheet for our Series A, and I happened to randomly run into an acquaintance on the street who had, been through the process many times in a different capacity. And, he told me a few things that I went back and negotiated that have a profound impact on where we currently stand, right? So I definitely should have sought out help along some of those dimensions too, where I thought I knew what I was doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think, I mean, I'd love to chat more about your thoughts on building teams. I think it stands out to me so much of this idea of before you spend all this time and effort building something, just figure out how to test those assumptions. And this idea of pre-selling something that doesn't exist, right? Which there's an ethical line of, don't represent, too much of what, but I think a lot of people that are more product and design and engineering focused are sometimes scared or hesitant to just have those sales conversations before the product exists. And one of the intellectual exercises I try to go through myself and that I put my team through is to say, okay, let's imagine this thing that we're talking about building that we think is going to be so great and so awesome and so much different and better. It exists. It's done. Let's wave our magic wand. Now what? And often so much time and effort and creative energy goes into like what you're going to build,
Right.
but there's not that much thought about, well, how are you going to get distribution? How are you going to get users? How are you going to get customers? And when there's that question, a lot of times folks come to their own realization of, oh, well, yeah, I guess we don't need all these things to begin with. We just need to figure out how we're going to get our first set of validation for this thing we want to build.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I often ask the question, like, what's the highest probability reason why this is going to fail? And how do we validate that reason in the cheapest way possible? Right. So yeah, start from there.
Yeah, I think one of the things a lot of folks don't realize that a lot of us in the tech space do is that, we'll put up landing pages for products that don't yet exist and do things like buy paid media into it to see what the conversion funnel is. And if you're not seeing an initial set of metrics that tell you, hey, you can acquire the customer for a low enough click, you can entice them with what the copy is, you can get them to want to register, you can get them to want to put in a credit card, like that right there is a no-go where you never even need to build the product. And we spent years doing that at DocStock for all sorts of, content products, whether they were videos or articles or documents. All right, I want to talk to you more about the lessons that you've learned around building a team, right?
Yep.
Because you started NerdWallet, pretty young, like a lot of us do. And I know my own journey, and I've talked about this pretty publicly, is I think I thought I was a good leader in my 20s. And looking back, I wasn't. And I wasn't good at building teams. And, I still see myself today as a major work in progress. And I'm sure I'm going to look back 5-10 years from today and be like, God, what the hell were you doing at that point in your life?
Right.
How do you think about, your company culture today with 550 employees? And if you were investing in the coach of somebody that, let's say, had a team of 20 people or 30 people, what would be the big advice that you would give them about how they should think about building their team for success?
Yeah. Wow. That's a big question with a long learning curve, right? I think, I guess I have a lot of tactical thoughts, but stepping back, big picture, I think I didn't really have a great mental model on what a high performing organization looked like. Having never worked in one before, coming out of the finance industry. So that was one big root cause of a lot of the problems I ran into. And second, I didn't have great mental models in terms of what, say, employees needed from a leader to really achieve their best results, right? So maybe I'll talk a little bit about the first one first. If I had spent even 3 months interning on an executive team that was really world class, I would have seen, for example, what kind of behavior is, a yellow flag versus a red flag, like things that just shouldn't happen amongst an executive team that's really working well. People should be having constructive and respectful conflict, not having meetings after the meeting to complain about each other, right? People should have high confidence that everyone on the team is competent and able to do their respective functions, not have lingering questions that are unresolved around that. The team should be having very transparent retros around what has gone well and not gone well to clear the air and to learn and look forward instead of letting things fester, right? There's so many different dimensions.
Dive in there for a second. It's pretty common in an engineering sprint to do a retro. I know you said you're a marketing leader. Do you do retros across multiple departments at NerdWallet?
Yeah, I do it within the exec team, especially. We consider the exec team to be our first team. Your team is not your function. It's the executive team, right? The problem with not doing a retro is that all these assumptions are left unaddressed, and it really lingers. People assume other functional leaders, when something goes wrong, are either incompetent, lazy, didn't care, etc. So in not doing a retro and not clearing the air, you're setting up the team for really long-term cultural problems. Another kind of variation but similar thing was just, I used to think it was inefficient to, when a function wanted to request resources, to make them write it up and submit it and have us all look at the resource requests and then basically approve it together as a team. Instead, I thought, well, isn't it faster if you just catch me in the hallway and I'll approve it, because, we're not running like in a budget constraints. So the problem with that is, politics is resource allocation or decisions in the absence of data and transparency, right? So the natural thing that starts happening after that is, people start trying to pre-lobby me for all sorts of resource requests. A lot of functional leaders don't know why certain people are getting certain things. Never gets openly addressed, right? So things like that can be like really tactical, but cause really well-intended, good cultural people to start behaving in really weird ways. I think like not having worked on an exec team before was a real miss for me in terms of like having to learn a lot of those things the hard way.
Who are the folks that you've hired that you've learned the most from, and what were those lessons?
Yeah, I've learned different things from almost everyone I've hired. I think of my exec team as, it's vital that I can coach them while being coached, right? If there's not that two-way street, then it becomes a really untenable, just strange dynamic. So I think we're all just the collection of our past experiences. And one thing that I think very differently about today than I used to is that if someone came from a brand name company that has done really well, that they are probably better at their job than someone who came from a flaming disaster. Mm-hmm. I actually find the opposite is true a lot of the time. And the reason is because a lot of companies became almost just monopolies overnight in technology. They could have executed extremely poorly and still achieved very similar outcomes to the ones they ultimately ended up achieving. So when you take a really high achieving person and stick them in a leadership role at one of these companies, they actually start diminishing in terms of self-awareness, and they attribute the success of the company to their whatever they were doing, right? Reinforcing all sorts of things that probably shouldn't be reinforced. Whereas someone who's seen things go horribly wrong probably learned a lot more. Like we probably learned a lot more about the economy during the financial crisis than we did during, good times. And, same could be said for a lot of different difficult situations. So I've totally started changing as a result the way I interview and think about bringing in executives, right? So, my belief is that there are some things that you're not going to get a good signal on in an interview that are very misleading. If you want to understand how collaborative someone is, how good of a manager they are, etc., you got to do reference checks. I don't even bother asking people about this in interviews anymore, because what's the point? Like, you're going to get a 10x better signal in a reference check, right? You probably can get a decent idea if someone can break down an ambiguous problem into the most important drivers in an interview. But yeah, so, and with exec hiring, I've also started skewing a lot less towards brand name companies and a lot more towards uh, first principles thinking around problems that might be relevant to us. So two big shifts for me there.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into the interview process. I'm curious how you do it. There's a couple things that I think about the interview process. So from a high level, and I've said this pretty publicly. Yeah, I've hired hundreds, I don't know, maybe thousands of people over the last 20 years, and I'm sure there are people a lot better and smarter than me. I'm not someone that can sit in a conference room across from somebody and over an hour conversation 2 or 3 times know if they're going to be the right fit for the company.
Right.
So I do think the single most effective thing that I've ever done is get a warm referral or get the reference checks. What I also try to do is make an interview process a little non-traditional where, when it's my time to interview somebody, we'll go for a walk and just get out of a traditional work environment and talk about all sorts of things about life and how they think about work. And I actually try to, in many cases, and I think most of our team members would attest to this, scare people away from working at our company. I let them know all the great things, but I'm like, look, this is a young startup. We're going to work harder. We're going to work longer hours. There's going to be more offered to you, but more demanded. Like, this is not the place that you should come to, if you don't want to be pushed harder than you've ever been pushed before professionally. And then I repeat that 2 or 3 times because, like, this isn't just something that sounds good. This is what you're going to have to live day to day. And, if somebody doesn't 110% opt in during that process, then I know they probably wouldn't be successful in our particular company culture. I'm curious to see what you do differently in the interview process today than maybe you did even 5 years ago. And what are some of the tricks and tips that you have for other managers and other company leaders of what they should be doing in the interview process to find the best talent for them?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I've changed my beliefs around the signal I can get out of an interview. I like you. I really index towards references and referrals and that kind of thing. Um, yeah, you raised also a great point about being upfront and transparent. It does both people a disservice if someone gets into a role and they don't realize all the works going in and the expectations, et cetera, right? So similar to you, I'm very upfront about everything I think is wrong with the business, everything that's wrong with the team, like the wood we need to chop, and hopefully that sets a good foundation for the path forward. Um, yeah, I'd say I also I lean a lot more on the team. So we're much more structured now about really breaking up different pieces of assessment via rubric among the team, and just really trying not to bias each other as we go in to have that debrief conversation. So that's probably a little bit different as well. Um, yeah, those are the main ones.
Yeah. And how do you think overall about building a great company culture? You and your company have these great scores on Comparably. You've got great scores on other employee review platforms. It's clear to see that you're doing a lot of things right. Now, part of that, just candidly, comes from running a successful business.
Right.
When people are winning, it cures a lot of other ills. Like, I remember, Twitter would be down every week, and it must have been so frustrating to be in that company as an engineer when the site would go down all the time. But the thing was growing like a weed, and so it cures a lot of other problems. But there's clearly something more than just business success that you all are doing. Like, you've built a culture where employees really value their coworkers, their leadership, the diversity and inclusion that's happening there. What are some of the specific things you do to build that company culture? And again, things that you maybe know today that you didn't know even a couple years ago to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of start from thinking about the work experience as a product, right? Like if you're a product manager trying to design a really engaging work experience, like what are the maybe 3 critical drivers, right? I think a major one is the employee has to feel like they're driving impact day to day. I mean, they could be doing not the most interesting thing, but if they can feel that impact and see it, it's going to make them feel like valued and like progressing and that kind of thing. And so historically, where sometimes this has gone wrong is like when we're not proactive about clearing up swim lanes, when we're not proactive about making sure that KPIs are understood and well communicated, or when we're not proactive about getting the entire product roadmap boiled down into one KPI at the highest level, and then many laddering into many more, right? So that stuff feels like very administrative and like communications oriented, but without it, you lose a lot of that connectivity throughout the organization. And then I think that growth is another big piece, like career growth, right? Like, look, it has to be mutually beneficial for someone to be there. And part of that is just having a career growth path. I'd say when a company is expanding headcount rapidly, it's arguably even easier because there's a lot more opportunity that's just popping up left and right in an organization than anyone could ever hope to take in, right? So but we've hit a more moderate pace. We're growing like, 20, 25% a year in terms of headcount. And so we think a lot about things like learning and development, letting people have some flexibility with switching teams, having a speaker series, things like that, like are just like whatever you can do on the L&D front, I think is worth the investment.
And you told me, right, you're going to now let your team at least for the foreseeable future work remotely, even presumably after COVID?
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a big part of retention. Frankly, I think that all employees in our industry, having been successful working in this capacity for whether it's 4 months or 9 months or a year, are really going to question why we're forcing them to commute for 3 hours a day after that, right? And also, like, yeah, there's going to be, I don't know about you, but I find the Bay Area incredibly expensive and suffocating, and it's hard to have a reasonable lifestyle here working even in a really highly paid job, right? So to be able to do this job from a place where you can own a home and live in a neighborhood that you want to live in or whatever it is, I think can really have a big impact on your entire family's lifestyle, right? So I think that one is kind of a no-brainer for us in terms of opening that up.
Yeah, I'm curious to get your take because Twitter's come out and they've said that their employees can now forever work remotely. How quickly do you anticipate this change happening? And another question I have is that something that's going to be more led by companies that, like you said, are either monopolies or doing really well? Because obviously, if your business is still struggling or if you're in the early stage, there's a lot of value to being closer together. How fast do you anticipate this maybe seismic change that employees really I don't know, like what percentage of the employee population do you anticipate a year or two from today that are working remote that aren't doing so today?
Yeah, I don't think anyone knows, but we've done some surveying internally, right? And so going into this crisis, I think we were about 23% remote. I think another, call it 50 or 60%, have expressed a preference either to be hybrid or fully remote. Maybe call it 20% said they would, move somewhere else. And that's just a start. And I think there's things we don't know yet, right? Like, are people going to feel like their career advancement is at risk if they're not in headquarters with their functional leader? A lot of things we just don't quite know yet. Our goal is to make it a level playing field, no matter where you are within our company, to get that advancement, get that mentorship. So we're going to be trying our best to make that happen. I think the benefits of doing that from a business perspective are you get a lot more scalability. You get a lot more access to diverse talent. We're building a product that reaches 150 million Americans a year, and they're from all over the place, right? They're from Iowa, they're from Atlanta, they're from the East Coast. So we ideally would have a content team as well as product managers distributed through all those locations.
Yeah. Last question on this topic. It's funny. People have thought for the last 15 years that I'm an entrepreneur based out of the Bay just because people knew DocStock and they know Comparable. I think a lot of times they just assume it. I grew up in LA. I've lived here my whole life. I'm really curious to see what this does to change maybe the power center of Silicon Valley. The reason Silicon Valley is what it is because it's where all the capital is. and where all the companies are. And if the companies really can be anywhere, and there's already so much distributed capital around the world, and that starts to even out a bit more. Is the Bay Area still in 5 years from today going to be the epicenter of everything, high tech and software? Like, what's your take on that?
I think it's going to be stickier than people think. And what my observation is that a lot of the top senior executive talent, just by virtue of the ecosystem here, live here and like being here. And hey, we're all social animals, right? Like our exec team, I think most of us have a preference for being back in the office, and at least on a somewhat regular basis. So there's just so much institutional knowledge locked up in geography. I think it's gonna take some time before that truly spreads out.
Yeah. All right. So I want to go to some other kind of thematic questions, and then I want us to spend a little bit of time before we wrap looking forward, where you see the future of, your business and industry and of personal finance. You've actually brought this up really thoughtfully, I think already 2 times. Someone asked me this question, which I thought was really poignant, which is, what's an example of something that you held a very, very strong belief or point of view on that you now think 180 degrees differently about, whether it's in your personal life or business?
Well, I guess I'll start personal. I'd say school and the first 7 years of my career reinforced this very narrow unilateral definition of what excellence was. And I'm embarrassed to say it, but I thought that I hit many attributes of that definition, and then I quickly realized that is just so not true. First of all, and damaging when you're an entrepreneur who's trying to figure out how to make this thing work. And I think I guess the second thing that I've really come a long way on is just thinking about limiting beliefs, right? Like I think my mental model has shifted a lot around why people don't perform or aren't being their best, right? I think largely speaking, most people have great intentions and have a lot of capabilities, but are driven by some set of either past experiences that are creating limiting beliefs that are like preventing them from doing what everyone else thinks is the rational thing to do, right? So I think especially as I think about when you're looking at your exec team or your team, there's always going to be people who you question the performance of. And I think I've gotten a lot better at empathizing and understanding and dissecting the reasons for underperformance, and as a result, being able to influence and coach as well.
Yeah. What do you think are the big things? Like, what are the main things that you see people do to unknowingly shoot themselves in the foot when it comes to their own career?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I find that 20-30% of the time it's just me not communicating expectations clearly for them, right? And so I always start there because I can relate back to my past job when I was really struggling with performance. I thought my job was to identify high quality investment theses for my boss. But he thought my job was to analyze his theses around high quality investment theses, right? And so I was about to get fired. We sat down and talked about it, and it turned 180 degrees around, right? So embarrassed to admit, but it still happens sometimes where we're just not on the same page around what the objective is, right? And that's on me, or that's on the manager. Once we get past that, oftentimes some set of past experiences causes someone, for example, to be conflict avoidant or not realize the impact of not proactively communicating certain things, or not realize that their job is no longer technical at this level, but that their job is really about project management or something at this level. There's a whole host of different things that people run into. And so it's so rewarding when you figure those things out and you see performance turn around 180 degrees.
Yeah. it's funny. I've had the conversation a lot because, we're still a small company, or, sub 30 folks. And I feel like, we put a lot of expectations on folks to do a lot of things. One of the big things I always try to talk to people about is be part of the solution. Don't just point out the problem. I think there are a lot of smart people, especially at the beginning of their careers, where they're really perceptive. And I'm like, "Hey, do you want to be the smartest person in the room that can stand in a corner and say everything that's wrong with something going on? Because, you know, that's a certain level of like intelligence and skill.
Right.
But the person that can actually move an organization forward towards the outcome that I think we all desire is always the person most rewarded. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. I think they struggle with, not just pointing out things that are going wrong, but being like a driver, a big part of that solution. And to be fair, I think a lot of organizations don't encourage that, or even more so, punish people for trying to take those activities.
Yeah.
And so it's a hard balance. But I think a lot of folks that figure that out in their career early, whether they ever choose to be an entrepreneur or not, are always so outsized rewarded, versus their peers.
Yeah. That's so well said. I wish early on in my career I had, well, I guess I'd put it this way. I think you're a much better influencer and a much better salesperson if you understand the perspective of the other person, right? Um, I was probably exactly that person you described earlier on in my career. I felt like I could see everything wrong with the organization and was super judgy about it. And like being on the other side is like the executive or the manager. Um, I think you really value when that person then has that locus of control and feels like they can address it directly in a candid way, iterate through different solutions, and eventually get really good at influencing the people around them. Right? That's such a valuable player on the team um, that managers will really push far in their careers.
Yeah. You and I are both relatively new parents. I think you have still a little nugget at home that's about to turn one. We have two small kids. I can say that was a pretty seismic change in my life, how I thought about really everything. For me personally, what I wasn't prepared for is how I actually wanted my world to get a lot smaller when I had my first son. And I was someone that, would always be at work networking events, loved to meet different people in a work and social context, wrote a lot publicly, would post on social media. I think had thought and planned that, at some point in life, I'd have a career in public office and in politics. The biggest change for me is I wanted my life outside of work really to get small. And I wanted to give all my energy and attention really just to my immediate family. And that really still to this day, like I don't post anything anymore at all on any social platforms about myself personally. I really guard my time so much more closely than I ever did. I'm curious to know how being a father now for almost a year has changed your perception both of life, but also maybe of business, and how you think about, your role at NerdWallet and interacting with folks there.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of parallels between being a parent and how I think about running the company. And yeah, I think our most limited resources are bandwidth, right? I mean, especially like as the company has more, financial leeway, there's a lot of things you can hire for, but your personal bandwidth becomes, the variable that you have to solve for in all things, right? And so I'm really with you there. I've gotten very reflective about the responsibilities I should be taking on even at work, versus the ones that are better suited or able to be distributed to other places. And I feel like that's by definition the only way you can scale, because you're scaling against the variable of your own bandwidth, right? And so if that means changing the way you think about certain things that you feel like you have to control or whatever else, I think I've been really reflective about those things. And yeah, I mean, I think having a child has just been a big perspective shift too. It's funny. The first thing I noticed actually was that everyone's name in the family changed. It's the first grandkids on both sides. So mom and dad became grandpa and grandma. I became dad. And then the kid becomes like the center of all naming and, everything. And, seeing that perspective, I don't know, I think had a pretty profound impact in terms of like just prioritization, what seems important, what seems not important. And so as time goes on, I think, I'm earlier on this journey of fatherhood than you, but I imagine I'll be shifting more and more into your camp as well.
Yeah. You brought up, right, time as a commodity none of us have enough of. What are your growth hacks when it comes to time? One of the ones that I've kind of employed over the last couple of years that has worked well for me is to dramatically be on email less. So I can say, in my early 30s, I would be on email every single half hour for work. And now I just really try to check email at set times a day. And I try to let my team know, hey, if you need to get a hold of me for something critical, email is not the way. Email is something to send me information that I can look over at some period of time and get back to you at some period of time. Obviously, folks like attorneys working on a deal or other folks may not have that. But what are the growth hacks that you have that give you back more productive time in your day?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most basic units I think about is meeting hours, right? So, I mean, it starts with what needs to be a meeting. A meeting has to have certain characteristics, right? Like all the decision makers necessary to get some major initiative moving forward have to meet on some regular cadence, right? So if you go to a whiteboard at the beginning of every year and audit every single stream of work, they're almost like chat rooms, right? that the company has, and then just scratch out every single thing that doesn't need to exist anymore or that you can extract yourself out from. Then second is like, even within that, what can be an email? What has to be a meeting? Anything that can be done asynchronously via email should be moved to email. Anything that should be a pre-read instead of a presentation should be a pre-read, right? And certain meetings should be half an hour and not an hour. And in fact, you can turn on speedy meetings and make 30-minute meetings 25 and 60-minute meetings 50 on Gmail, right? And then third, I think like once you have a team, you have to accept the fact that there are very few things that you insert yourself in that you really need to be a part of. So what is the bare minimum of those things? Because the more you extract yourself from, the more you can scale to do other things, right? So I've pulled myself largely out of product delivery and product management, for example. I find it deeply intellectually stimulating, and I love being in on those meetings, and I love reading the decks, but I also feel confident at this point that the team is going to find the best ideas, is going to execute well, and that I don't need to really be as involved, right? So I'm constantly auditing what I can extract myself from as well.
Yeah. I love the idea of shorter meetings. I try to push things to the farthest that they can go to see what the line is when you need to pull back. One of the things that I do for myself now, and I try to get my team to do, is that phone screening interviews for candidates can only be 15 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
So my point of view is you're never going to hire somebody over the phone. You always need to meet them at some point. So don't spend half an hour or 45 minutes talking to a candidate. There's really 5 or 6 things I need to know of whether we should meet that candidate in person. And so I have my EA never book more than 15 minutes. And I try to get all the managers in our office to say your phone screens, whether you want to invite a candidate in, should be no longer than 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's a great one. I got to think about that. That sounds like a good move.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to talk about the future a little bit, and I'm just really fascinated to get your take on like what are the big uncharted areas for personal finance, right? So obviously, we always want folks, and your roots were, hey, get the best credit products at the best rates. Don't be overcharged here. Know every sort of financial instrument you could have, whether it's insurance or credit reporting. Obviously, there's tools to help people save more. There's what you do, companies like Acorns, which will take money that you're spending anyway and turn it into fractional, investments in equities or bonds. Obviously, Robinhood has blown up and I think is legitimately moving the markets to heights that, are even more uncharted than anything we've seen before. When you think a decade out, what are the big problems and the big opportunities that you want NerdWallet to be in a position to help millions of people around the world on when it comes to personal finance? And are there categories in additional personal finance that are really meaningful for you all as well?
Yeah, I'll try to reduce this down to something really simple, right? I think if a financial system is functioning properly, when you don't have enough money for, say, like a home, a college education, or a car, you can go get a loan. If you have too much money and you need to deposit it or invest it, you can figure out what to do. And maybe you insure your home, your life, your car, right? I mean, it's really quite simple. So now we've injected a few problems. First, there's these intermediaries that make it really hard to figure out which product's actually best because of their compensation structures. But the other big problem that we haven't talked about is that you just don't know what you don't know. So for example, you may have no idea that your neighbor's paying way less than you for home and auto insurance, right? And you may have no idea that the tax law just changed and that you should be filing for a supplemental refund if the House passes this certain thing next week, right? And why would you ever know? Like, that's not a good use of your time. And so what's kind of a janky version of that working is financial advisors. They have a bunch of clients that are very similar. And so they see these basic heuristics or patterns, right? They're like, okay, I should probably tell all of my clients to pay their property taxes before the end of the year because the tax law is changing, right?
Yeah.
But that's really not rocket science. And that's something that computer heuristics can easily do. Like an app can easily do that. And the effect of it is, when you sign up to be a NerdWallet member in 5-10 years, we're going to watch your back, right? Like literally anything that would save you money, you're going to get an email that's going to tell you exactly what you should do, how much money you'll save, and click here, right? And that's what a digital financial advisor looks like. It's not complicated, but it makes sure you're doing the right things. Yeah. This other stuff, I mean, I think there's people may have different opinions on whether, someone with $400 should be investing in the stock market. Some people would, say that it's just a casino. Other people would say you should buy low cost index invest. I mean, I'm not going to opine on that, but there are a lot of businesses that are, more oriented towards, facilitating the casino, right? But I don't consider that to be solving like a core consumer finance need.
Yeah. Do you think that I think so many people are pondering and wondering this question now. I just want to get your take. I'm of the point of view and have been for a while that there are some fundamentals in our economy that just don't make sense. And clearly, when you have the federal government putting as many trillions of dollars in there, it's going to do things like move up the stock market. We had to do something to make sure that folks were, had a safety net during the beginning of COVID. But we don't know when this is going to end. I'm of the point of view that a lot of people are not prepared for how bad this might get. I'm kind of curious to just get your overall macro take on where you see the economy and what the next year and a half might look like.
Yeah. That's a big one. I think, yeah, I mean, I'm sure people have read in the news that, the stimulus has been huge. Currently we're not seeing the brunt of it because something like 2/3 of the people who are unemployed are actually making more money unemployed than they were when they were employed due to the stimulus, which is, arguably the right thing to do as we're trying to get through the pandemic. But so a lot of that hasn't shown up in the dollars and cents of the economy. And, we're definitely seeing that, from, we have a pretty unique vantage point, right? Like we see people coming to our site looking for financial products and applying and either getting approved or rejected. And, things seem like almost business as usual from that perspective. Uh, yeah. So in terms of, whether I see another leg down, I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I think a lot of it has to do with political will. If the country decides that, we're okay with hundreds of thousands of people dying, maybe index towards like an older demographic politically, that it's untenable to shut down businesses to prevent this from happening, then we're going to have a lot of death and pain, and maybe a smaller impact on the economy, right? So I just don't know how to call where the political will is, but I think that's going to be a big factor as well.
All right. Well, I asked you earlier, and you've been absolutely incredible in this interview. If you could go back in time into your 20s and give yourself one piece of advice, if you could go back into any point in your 30s and sit down with yourself and give yourself one piece of advice that you feel like you wish that you knew then, what would that be?
Yeah, 30s. I'm 8 years into this now, and yeah, looking back even 3 or 4 years, I I think a lot about just leadership and the lessons I've learned there. Um, I think that, you know, one of my misconceptions, I think, is thinking from the perspective of the golden rule, right? Like, I want to treat other people how I want to be treated. I think everyone leads with that, but everyone is different, and I'm an unusual person. And I didn't think a ton about, as a leader earlier on, things like psychological safety, security, uh, just the level of authenticity that's really needed for people to feel good about the organization that they're in and contributing to. So I think I've become a lot more transparent and direct and candid and about the good things and the bad, the past 4 or 5 years as a result of some of those learnings there.
Yeah. Well, listen, I started watching NerdWallet in 2010, being amazed by your SEO. I've been watching these employee reviews and the feedback that comes in about you and your team on Comparably, which has been amazing. And really, just to get to have the last hour to talk together, I could spend all day. I've been in a fortunate position to get to do 100 of these interviews with amazing CEOs and leaders. And I'll tell you, Tim, I think you're one of the most thoughtful, well-rounded, like culture leaders, business leaders, what you've gone through. I think, you're obviously building a business that's helping millions of people. And I'm just really excited to see where you're going to take this. And thank you for taking time out of your day and from your business and from your family to share, all this wisdom and advice with everybody out there. And I think there's going to be even more people rooting on for your success, because it's just pretty clear to see you're a really good guy.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for the support. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I guess to all the entrepreneurs out there, don't forget to have fun. There's a lot to figure out, and it's painful at times, but it's a lot of fun too.
Great. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Tim. If you want to go on Comparably and share your feedback about working at your organizations, we're definitely want to make companies as transparent as possible and highlight amazing leaders like Tim and companies like NerdWallet. So stay tuned for more great sessions, and thank you for everyone for joining.